Speaking of 9/11, the families of victims are still pursuing in the U.S. justice system attempts to sue various people within Saudi Arabia and the Saudi government for the events of 9/11. You have diplomatic immunity. Do you believe it's fair for those families to try to seek justice from Saudi Arabia for what happened?
I cannot put myself in the place of the relatives of the victims of 9/11. Their loss is something that I cannot even presume to understand or to share or to. But I do appreciate that any loss of life has its effect on the relatives of that person. What I do say is that Saudi Arabia has never hidden anything about that matter.
So you're not worried about anything that could come out from FBI documents, redacted information?
Not at all. We've seen what happened, if you remember, with the famous 28 pages that President Bush, how do you say it, excluded from exposure when the 9/11 report came out. Nothing.
So nothing in those pages you believe will surprise you or implicate Saudi Arabia in any way?
There is absolutely nothing. And I, for one, and I think all Saudis believe, as our foreign minister, the late Prince Saud, said in front of the White House when he met with President Bush, after President Bush kept those pages away from the report. He said, please, for our sake, if you think that this is going to help Saudi Arabia, it's not. Put everything on the table. So if there are still documents within U.S. archives that have not been put to the public, I think they should be brought out, because there will be nothing in them whatsoever. You know, America took investigative efforts to find the culprits behind 9/11. Saudi Arabia did too. After all, these were Saudis. We wanted to know who was responsible, if there was anybody responsible in Saudi Arabia for that. And we found absolutely nothing. So yes, to the better exposure of the reality, I hope that the U.S. government releases all documents about 9/11.
An article written by Dan Christensen of the Florida Bulldog, dated September 23rd, 2022. The headliner reads, "Law firm that leaked 9/11 suspect's deposition to embarrass Saudi Arabia slapped by magistrate," in which the article reads as the following. In a blow to thousands of 9/11 families, a federal magistrate has ruled that their New York law firm and its chief investigator willfully breached court protective orders by leaking to a reporter the deposition of a Saudi diplomat to embarrass Saudi Arabia and gain an advantage in its case. U.S. Magistrate Sarah Netburn immediately sealed her order, but docket notes about it state, quote, "When the court tried to investigate this breach, Kreindler engaged in a sustained campaign of delay and obstruction," end quote. The Saudi diplomat whose deposition was leaked, Muwasset al-Jarrah, has long been secretly implicated in a leadership role in the 9/11 plot. His name didn't become public until May of 2020, when it was disclosed by a government filing error in the case. The embarrassment cited by Netburn, appears to refer to the fact that FBI agents found numerous child porn images on Jarrah's computer in 2004. Testimony during Netburn's public inquiry into the late leak last year did not establish where or why the FBI examined Jarrah's computer. Netburn found sanctions appropriate. For Kreindler investigator John Fawcett, that means he is officially barred from further participating in the case in any capacity. The law firm, Kreindler, had previously announced that it parted ways with Fawcett. As for Kreindler, the lead firm targeting the Saudis, it will be removed immediately from the plaintiff's executive committee and required to pay the attorney's fees and costs for Saudi Arabia associated with this breach, the docket says. The plaintiff's executive committee is the lawyers group appointed by the court that takes a leading role on behalf of all the firms representing clients in related civil cases that are consolidated in the multi-district litigation. Netburn sealed her order until September 28 to give the plaintiff's executive committees, Saudi Arabia, and the FBI time to request redactions before it is made public. Saudi Arabia is represented by the Washington, D.C. law firm Kellogg, Hansen, Todd Fiegel, and Frederick, in which the firm did not respond to an email request for comment. Brett Eagleson, a Kreindler client who on 9/11 lost his father in the South Tower of the World Trade Center, called Netburn's Wednesday decision, quote, "the most egregious ruling I have ever seen. Something's got to be up. She's blowing up the case, basically taking away our counsel. All John Fawcett did was expose a child pornographer," end quote. Kreindler firm released a statement, quote, "we plan to appeal the magistrate's order, which completely misstates and misrepresents the facts and record to the benefit of the Saudi government," end quote. Fawcett's job was to manage and evaluate all the 9/11 discovery documents the firm obtained as it seeks to hold Saudi Arabia financially responsible for the 2001 attacks that left 2,996 people dead and injured approximately 25,000 others. Fawcett testified that he leaked a transcript of Jarrah's deposition to Yahoo News reporter Michael Isikoff in July of 2021 because of his concerns that Jarrah was consuming and possibly trafficking in child porn. Thousands of Encore records have been released to the public. Among other things, those records document numerous connections of U.S.-based Saudi personnel and entities to the 9/11 attacks. In 2016, amid Freedom of Information Act litigation, the FBI released to Florida Bulldog the first documents about Operation Encore. At that time, the code name was kept secret, as was Mohammed al-Jarrah's name. A 2021 FBI report identified Jarrah for the first time as also working for Saudi Arabia's primary intelligence agency, the General Intelligence Presidency. A heavily redacted section of the report states that as early as 2001, the Saudi Embassy's Islamic Affairs section had indeed played a leadership role in the overall coordination, and of which Jarrah was the director and was one of the largest spy operations in the world with approximately 50 officers. Jarrah, who worked for Bandar bin Sultan and in turn supervised Fahad al-Thumairy, an imam at the King Fahd Mosque in Los Angeles, who was denied any connection to 9/11, is named in other declassified FBI reports written as early as 2003 as being heavily connected, linked to Saudi Sunni extremists operating inside the United States. The irony is that since the FBI has declassified and made public an avalanche of new and illuminating records about Saudi government involvement in 9/11, including much information about the role played by none other than Mohammed al-Jarrah. Now, I have made numerous videos in the last 3 weeks in reading over 1,500 of the latest declassified Operation Encore files and Mohammed al-Jarrah's participation. As for Judge Netburn, well, this is the same Judge Netburn who on August 26, 2022, recommended that a federal district court reject the plaintiff's effort to use assets from Afghanistan Central Bank to compensate the families of 9/11 victims. And in her 43-page report and recommendation, which you can find online, Magistrate Judge Netburn noted that the Taliban's de facto control over Afghanistan has opened questions as to whether funds in the country's central bank, approximately $3.5 billion, of which lie in the Federal Reserve Bank of New York, could be turned over to relatives of U.S. victims of terrorism. In her recommendation, Judge Netburn argued that plaintiffs' motions in these cases should be denied for 3 reasons. First, she asserted that Afghanistan's central bank is immune to the jurisdiction of the court. Second, setting aside the issue of jurisdiction, she stated that the court cannot determine the Terrorism Risk Insurance Act of 2002 authorizes the turnover of funds to September 11 victims' families because doing so would imply recognizing the Taliban as Afghanistan's official government, which it was at that time. And third, under the Terrorism Risk Insurance Act of 2002, the U.S. government's authority to mobilize assets of Afghanistan's central bank would require that the Taliban and the bank have a consensual relationship, which Judge Netburn argued was not the case, given that the Taliban seized the bank by force. Remarkable in its own right. And if you don't think that the Saudi government has just as much power as an Israeli lobby, well, then you are basically in denial. The Gulf lobby, by its own extension, gives more money than the Israeli lobby. What the Israeli lobby has is a lot more congressional influence regarding the dual Israeli citizenship of certain members of Congress, as well as the Pentagon. The Saudi government continues to be protected by the U.S. government. And what does that tell you, ladies and gentlemen, regarding which allegiance our government holds to?